All right, welcome to the Work the System podcast, where we help entrepreneurs make more and work less using systems. And I'm your host, Josh Fonger. And today we've got a special guest. We've got Jessica Rhodes. And Jessica is the founder and the equal co-owner of Interview Connections, the first and leading podcast booking agency. The Interview Connections team of booking agents are the podcast powerhouses behind many of the record-breaking book launches you've seen today, with clients such as Allie Brown, JJ Virgin, Perry Marshall, other authors you may know, and numerous PR agencies who hire them for their podcasting savvy and booking skills. Jessica started podcasting 2014 with the launch of Rock the Podcast, and also has co-hosted several other shows, including the Podcast Producers and Womansplaining. She is the acclaimed author of Interview Connections, How to hashtag Rock the Podcast from both sides of the mic, and has been a featured speaker at Podcast Movement, PodFest, Multimedia Expo, and Dream Business Academy. Okay, well, very good. I'm excited, Jessica, to get into this and learn more about podcasting, this new medium, to get the message out. But first, to give us the backstory, how did you get into this line of work?
Hey, Josh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited to be here. So I got into the podcasting industry back in 2013. So I come from the nonprofit industry, actually. So before I started my business, I was running a nonprofit canvassing team. So I was part of an organization. We did door-to-door canvassing and fundraising. So I came from a world where I was outside knocking on doors, doing like community organizing. And then I got pregnant with my first child, and that lifestyle and that job was no longer what I wanted to do. So I was talking to my dad, who's an entrepreneur, and I said, I would really like to be a stay-at-home mom.
Mm-hmm.
And he told me about being a virtual assistant, which was a totally new concept to me. I was not familiar at all with online entrepreneurship or anything like that. And he says, trust me, I will teach you everything you need to know. I'll even be your first client, and I'll show you how you can have a home-based business. So that's really how I got started as an entrepreneur. And then one of the first things that he asked me to do for him as a virtual assistant was to book him for interviews on podcasts. And so this was in 2013, which I know isn't that long ago, but in podcasting, it's a very long time. So this was really at the start of when business owners and entrepreneurs were really starting to leverage podcasting. So my dad was my first client. I was booking him for podcast interviews, getting guest booked on his show. And then I started taking on a couple other clients. And that's really where I started to see a need for this service in the marketplace. And so I then launched Interview Connections and moved away from being a general virtual assistant, where this was one task, one service I offered of many, to this is my core business.
Wow, so you have been there from the very beginning then, when podcasting just started. What has changed? So 2000, I think you said 13, 2019, what's changed over that time period?
So much has changed and evolved in the podcasting industry. So just looking at it from like a very bird's eye view, like so many companies are investing in podcasting. It's insane. Everywhere from the largest, companies like Spotify acquiring podcast companies, that's obviously happening, all the way down to small business owners and solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, making this a very serious part of their marketing strategy. I'm seeing entrepreneurs and authors specifically moving away from a traditional book tour into leveraging podcasts. Our client, Eric Brotman's he's a certified financial planner, and he is on local news all the time in his local market. But when he started doing podcast interviews, he actually saw that move the needle more than that traditional those traditional TV interviews did. And that's simply because podcast interviews put you in front of a national audience, and it also creates evergreen content that you can be sharing and leveraging more effectively than an interview that only airs one time live.
Right. So because obviously most people don't have a podcast. I mean, you and I both do, but most owners of companies don't. How would they decide if it's good for them? So maybe an author is good, but let's say you own a solar panel company.
Yeah.
Should you have a podcast or not?
That is a great question. There are business types that podcasting is a no-brainer for, and then there are kinds of businesses where it wouldn't be my first recommendation, but I think regardless of what business you're in, you can see a benefit from it. So number one, if you are in like any business that you're in, you can get a search engine optimization benefit from podcasting. So that's just purely if you're going out and getting interviewed on podcasts, you're getting a backlink to your website on the podcast host show notes page. And so that's just good for your SEO. And whether you're a local business or an online business, you want people to find you on Google. So there's SEO value there. The types of businesses that I recommend leverage podcasting are businesses where you can work with clients virtually. So marketing agencies, coaches and consultants, financial planners can work with people all over the country. Accountants can typically work with people outside their local area. So service businesses where you can work with people virtually, and also businesses where your average lifetime value of a client is pretty high. Because with podcasting, the number of people you're reaching is a lot smaller. It's a lot lower than the number of people you would reach, for example, if you got a guest post on Forbes, or you would probably be viewed by, could be millions of people or high thousands of people.
Mhm.
But those are just like views, or maybe they kind of like glance at the article, skim it for 2 seconds. But with a podcast interview, let's just say 100 people listen to the episode, small number of people in the grand scheme of things, but those are 100 people that are actually listening to you talk for 30 minutes. And that's a really, really powerful way to connect with your prospective clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And sometimes for me, I want to have the biggest number possible. But if
Yeah,
you just imagine if you gave an hour-long presentation at your local Chamber of Commerce meeting and you had 30 people in the room, you'd be ecstatic that you had 30 people there. And if you had
exactly.
100 on a podcast, then that's powerful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, completely.
So what are the pros and cons of podcasting? You've been in this world for a while. Are there certain things that really make it powerful and things that really detract from doing it?
Yeah. The pros are obviously, a lot of the stuff that I already talked about with search engine optimization and ability to really connect with your target audience in a more intimate way, in a way that you can't do through written content. People can't hear your voice. They can't hear your story. They can't hear you connecting with somebody else that they also know, like, and trust. That, feeling that they can eavesdrop on a conversation is a really powerful way. So some of the biggest pros are you are able to build social proof, credibility, build a relationship with your prospective clients. I will tell you, when I have a sales call with a prospective client who heard me on a podcast, it's the easiest sales call in the world because I already did the work of the sale on the podcast.
Mhm.
I don't have to go through my whole spiel. They're like, oh yeah, I heard your interview. Let's just kind of get down to like how we can work together. So it really shortens your sales cycle and it brings you leads that are super qualified and ready to buy. So those are some huge pros. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the social proof aspect of podcasting. We have a client, AJ Wilcox, who is the founder of one of the best LinkedIn advertising agencies called B2 Linked. And he has been working with us for several years. And he told us that, when he gets clients come to him, leads who come to him and they Google for what he does, not only do they see his company website, but they see interview with AJ Wilcox on this podcast, interview on this podcast. They're seeing a whole page of Google search results featuring podcast interviews with him. So what does that tell the lead? It tells them that the founder of this agency is the most in-demand expert in LinkedIn advertising, which is a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you want to work with the agency that's getting the most press coverage on podcasts? So by getting interviewed on a lot of podcasts, big or small, you're showing your prospective audience that you are the in-demand expert. So they naturally would want to work with you more than the agencies that aren't getting any interviews.
Hmm. So a big piece of it is the authority aspect you get. Now, does that come from being on other people's podcasts? I mean, should a lot of folks be trying to get on other people's podcasts, or does that come from having your own podcast?
Yeah. So I'm kind of talking mostly about being on other people's podcasts because that's where a lot of folks start, right? If you don't have your own podcast, my first recommendation is to start getting interviewed on other shows. You can practice talking into a microphone, which I realize I've been doing this for 5 years, but I can tell you the first time I got on a microphone and was interviewed, like it can be a little nerve-wracking. So do this as a guest on some other shows before you commit to producing your own podcast, because this kind of gets into you asked about pros and cons. Podcasting can be a big investment of time and money. It's a smaller investment of time and money when you're a guest because you're not committing to a production schedule, to a marketing plan to, editing and all that stuff. And the con, I would say, is that it is a long-term marketing strategy. You can't get into podcasting and expect it to pay off within a month or, even 3 months. It does take a little while. And some people get lucky and they get a really amazing client after their first interview that they do, or they launch their podcast and they get a client after the first episode goes live. But most of the time it's a strategy where you're putting out content, you're speaking into the microphone, you're giving it your all, and you're like, I see that there's people downloading it, but I haven't heard from anyone. And like, am I going to make money on this? And you have to put a lot of time and energy into it and a lot of care into the content, because it's got to be high value content. There's a lot of podcasts online now and you've got competition for listening. So you want to put out quality content, and it does take a while to build that traction where people start, hearing your podcast and saying, okay, I want to work with you now. So I would say that the biggest con is that it just takes a lot longer than some other marketing strategies might.
Okay. So obviously an ad directly to a sales page might be faster than getting on someone's podcast and waiting a few months for it to get published and then hoping that someone shows up.
Yeah, and it's hard to even kind of simplify it down to that, right? Because I think that podcasting is perfect for businesses where it's really difficult to summarize what you do in an ad. So for coaches and consultants, I would say this is so much better than running an ad, because people need, for someone to hire a coach or a consultant, especially a coach or consultant where your packages, like people are going to invest 5, 10, 20,000, maybe even 50,000. One ad is not going to do that. People really need to feel like they know, like, and trust you. And you can do that through a podcast. It's hard to do that just through an ad.
Yeah, definitely. So let's say you're an accountant and you're a newer accountant and you're young, but you specialize in, let's say you specialize in accounting for online companies.
Okay.
Would you recommend that part of their marketing plan would be to get on a podcast or their own podcast, or what would be the kind of the route they should take?
Yeah. So that I actually have a client in mind who fits that description, and he's got an amazing ROI by going and being a guest on other shows.
Mhm.
So his name is Peter Lang. He's the designer CPA. And so he really specializes in working with creative entrepreneurs, designers, graphic designers, interior designers. We're his clients. So we're not a design company, but we're like, we want to work with you. And by going and getting interviewed on podcasts, he's gotten so much business, so many opportunities. We booked him on A Well-Designed Business, which was the top interior design business podcast. And he was got an opportunity to co-author a book with the host of that show, and just so much has come. I mean, he's like, you guys transform my business with these interviews. And he has been in the process of starting a podcast, but the guesting just transformed his business so much. I'm not sure if he's launched his own show yet.
Wow, that's cool. So what is the hook, or what is the technique to get somebody on to get on a podcast? Like, do they have to have a interesting story? Because I'm assuming that these podcasters want to make sure they have good guests. So how do you get
Yeah.
booked?
Yeah, so you want to be really clear about your message. If you want to start getting interviewed on podcasts, it's important that you know who your target audience is, because obviously to get that ROI, to experience some of the results that I've shared stories about, you want to know, you have to be speaking to the right audiences and be going on the correct show. So if you think your ideal client is this person, but you're actually should be talking to this, you have to know who your target audience is. You have to really get clear on your positioning and what your interview topics and questions are. So those are some things that you want to figure out before you start diving into the strategy. And really, any entrepreneur who's been in business for more than a couple of years, they know who they work with. When people ask like, well, how do I know what my interview topics and questions are? Those really come from, what do you teach your clients? What are the biggest pain points that your clients come to you for? And list those out, and then create some suggested interview questions that position you to address those pain points.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your potential clients are in that audience and you're speaking to their pain points and providing value around how they can solve those pain points, you then become a no-brainer of someone that they would want to hire to help them personally.
Where do you see the future of podcasting going? And we talked a little bit about this offline, but so each of these media channels, whether it's a Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, they seem to start off as great channels and kind of like the Wild West. Everyone can go in there, make money because it's simple. The big players aren't there yet, and there are tactics to win. And it seems like with podcasting, it's kind of going through the same thing where it used to be you could get there and get views, but now it's getting more competitive. Where do you see? You see more consolidation, more big money? What do you see?
Well, I definitely see a lot more big companies coming into podcasting. And if you just look at some of the biggest companies there, they get creative about their branding. I mean, iHeartRadio sounds like this boutique radio company. It's a huge corporation that has a cool name to make you think it's more indie than it is.
Mhm.
There are huge companies that are coming into this space. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think there are a lot of, independent podcasters that are like, we don't want the professional radio people coming in. This is our space. Honestly, like it's a good thing that these companies are coming in because they're making things simpler. They're putting so much money into the industry that we've been working so hard to figure out and cobbling together all these different technologies and all that stuff. So, and it's also bringing so much more credibility to this space. When big companies get into it, I mean, we're seeing like A-list celebrities doing a podcast. I'm telling you, 5 years ago, I remember I had a client and their wife is a very like leading expert, goes on a lot of TV. And at the time, she wouldn't even do a podcast because it was too small of a medium, didn't want to like mess with her positioning. She has a podcast now. So I literally see these like, huge like celebrities, experts, entrepreneurs that are taking this medium so seriously. And the more people that know about podcasting as the average, we look at things like Edison Research and they tell us, okay, on average, what percentage of Americans listen to a podcast on a regular basis? That number has gone up consistently since 2013. So as an entrepreneur, getting in now, starting, like if you haven't started a podcast yet, if you haven't started being a guest on one, start now because the popularity has continued to rise over the last 5 and 6 years. I don't see it going down anytime soon.
Okay. So the key thing is get in now while you still can because maybe
Yeah.
harder down the road.
And I would say don't overthink it too, because I see a lot of people get stuck in like analysis paralysis and they're just trying to come up with the most perfect show. And like, you just got to get in there. The beautiful thing about being a guest on podcasts and hosting a show too, is really comes down to conversations. You don't have to be this polished keynote speaker. You don't have to be the perfect late night talk show guest and you have to know all your jokes. You get on and you have a conversation. You connect with the person you're talking to, you listen, and you deliver value. You talk about the thing that you know best, which is whatever you've started a business around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. For us, as you probably can tell, we keep it very simple, right? It needs to be authentic.
Yeah.
It needs to be simple. It needs to be helpful for those who are in our audience, which are small business owners. As long as we do that, then it goes quite well.
Yeah.
So what about, this may be a little more detailed than most people care to know about, but what about monetization? So let's say you actually go through trouble, you build a podcast. What are the best ways to monetize it? And actually
Yeah.
make
So
money?
there's a couple different ways you can monetize your own podcast. There's obviously advertisements, which is probably what most people think of when they think about advertising is I want to get other companies to sponsor my show and run ads. That's one way. I've done that before. I've had podcasts where I've had advertisers on the show, and it's not that hard. You find a company whose target audience is your target audience. You create a consistently published show and you approach that company. I write about this in my book called Interview Connections. There's a whole chapter and I actually give the template of the email I sent to land my first sponsor. So get my book on Amazon for that. And this is another thing I think a lot of people overthink and they go to like advertising agencies, which can be helpful, but really go to people you know. Podcast Movement sponsored our show, The Podcast Producers, a few years ago because it was an obvious fit. Our target audience was exactly who Podcast Movement wanted to reach. So we reached out to them. We at the time offered a flat rate. So we didn't do like per 1,000 downloads because when you're, an independent podcaster, you probably don't have 20,000 downloads an episode. So come up with a reasonable flat rate for a certain number of episodes and just hop on the phone and make the pitch. If it's a no-brainer advertising strategy, I think you can land a sponsor pretty quick. Now, you can do that. I don't think that's the most profitable way if you're an entrepreneur. I think the smarter way to make money from your podcast is actually to keep everything focused on getting people into your business. because you can probably get a $500 sponsorship, but if your average client is worth 10 grand, I would stay focused on getting that client over to work with you in your core business.
Okay. So the sponsorships could be a distraction, kind of take you off.
Yeah, I think they're a big distraction, actually. If you have a podcast that's promoting the brand, your brand and your business, I would keep people focused on what you do.
Mhm. Okay. Interesting. So this is more a personal question. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got a couple kids now, and you wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. What has it been like starting a company from scratch, essentially, to where it is? It's quite a large company. What kind of things have you learned? What kind of transitions did you have to go through to go from just being a virtual assistant to where you are now?
Well, I failed at being a stay-at-home mom because I did not stay at home for very long, but that's okay. Yeah, so I mean, just sort of the nutshell version, and it's been quite a journey over the last 5.5, 6 years. Is I went into this wanting to be a stay-at-home mom with a lifestyle business so I could have an income. And then, the babies, they grow up pretty fast. They start crawling, they nap a lot less. And then you realize, I think I really need to make a lot more money than what I can make during nap time. Um, so, so I ended up bringing in a nanny at first. She worked for us for a couple of years, and then we shifted to sending the kids to preschool. I got an office. My husband is also very flexible with his work. He's a self-employed lawyer, so he works remotely from a home office. So after about 1.5 years, 2 years, I rented a small office. This was before I had employees. And he worked from home, and then I went out to an office to work. And then in 2017, I made the big shift. I hired my first employee, who is now my business partner, Margie. And we started hiring employees and kind of got rid of our virtual team of contractors and just took everything in house. I found a great office space where we could have all of our employees together with us. And then Margie became my business partner in 2018, and we've just continued to scale the business. We're now a 7-figure company in 2019 here. So it's been exciting. And I don't know if that answered your question, but that's sort of the the simplified version of what has happened in the company and kind of in my life over the last 5 years.
Well, that's amazing. Well, that shows that even with busy family duties and everything else going on, that you can make it and as an entrepreneur, and it sounds like you had a really smooth trajectory. I'm sure there were bumps along the way towards where you are now, which is great to get to that $1 million mark and beyond. And I think the other thing for entrepreneurs to be aware of is that if you pick a market like podcasting that is growing, it really helps smooth the curve upwards, knowing that demand's continuing to increase, and so you continue to gain skills and you continue to ride a great wave, which I think is awesome.
Yeah.
So that was smart. That was smart to do that, and good for your dad to kind of push you in that direction and get you on the right path.
Yeah.
Because there are some paths that lead to plateaus or paths that lead downwards, and this is definitely one that's going to keep going up, which is very cool. So what about applications? So you've learned a lot about growing companies. You learn about podcasts and PR and marketing. What lessons have you learned that you think can translate to people that aren't going to do podcasts? Is there any lessons or business lessons they should be aware of?
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like the biggest business lesson that is really that business is all about relationships, and providing value and listening and just really focusing on your relationships. Like that's really what it comes down to. Podcasting is not so much of a media or PR strategy as it is a way that you can be networking and building relationships with people in your industry, because really every success story that I can think of for my clients that get an ROI, it really comes down to them having a great relationship with the host or with the listener. That's really what it comes down to. And that can be applied to anything in business.
Really. So I love that. So basically, people like doing business with people they like. And, based on this call, hopefully you and I can do business together in the future. I'm sure we will.
Love to.
Because I'm enjoying the conversation. And I found that as well, is that cold traffic, and we've done the stats on it, cold traffic converts so much worse than warm traffic are people that have heard about us through someone else, or people that have some relationship to us, that it's not even close to the same thing. And so the more ways, and the podcast is great for this, the more ways people can warm up to who you are through digital mediums and scalable mediums, the more people you can touch. And having a handshake with every single person is way harder than having this kind of conversation where they can be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's cool. Well, hey, I know you've got to run to probably your next podcast. I know I got one right after this. Let's kind of do some wrap-up questions. So what's something that I should have asked you, but I didn't ask you, and you want to make sure that the audience gets to hear about?
So one little technical thing, because I've talked to people that say, well, I've done podcasts, but I didn't really get a lot out of it. And there's obviously a lot of different factors that go into having those successful results that I kind of shared about a little bit. Having a good call to action, I think, is one little thing that gets overlooked a lot, but it's so important, because when people hear a great interview with you and they're like, I want to connect with this person, that call to action right at the end is so important. So my biggest tip there is to make sure it is easy to remember and easy to spell, because most people listen to a podcast on their mobile device. I know for me, I always listen to podcasts on my phone. I'm never playing a podcast on my computer. It's on my phone while I'm around the house or in the car. And even today, I'm preparing for a strategy call with a client next week, and his call to action is one thing I'm going to work with him on, because I'm listening to one of his podcasts. He gives it, and even a second later, like 30 seconds later, I'm like rewinding it. So I was like, oh crap, I forget what it was again. So make it very easy to remember. Get a simple domain that you can redirect to a landing page, which makes it very clear what people can get from you on that landing page. So
That's great.
that's just, yeah.
That's perfect. Well, it's a great segue to my last question, which is, where can people find you? Or, what is your call to action?
So interviewconnections.com. That is where I would love for you to go. You can learn about our company, check out our blog and our podcast, but really my home base is interviewconnections.com.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, we're going to end with that. And again, thank you, Jessica, for making the time today and sharing your wisdom. And thank you all, you entrepreneurs, for joining us, either whether you're live here with us on Facebook or watching through another device. Thanks for being here, being part of the program. And stay tuned next week, where we're going to share with you a tip or trick for another business expert like Jessica, or I'll be interviewing one of my previous clients so you can learn how to make more and work less. And before we sign up today, make sure to leave us a comment. Leave us a comment in whatever platform you're listening to this, whether it's iTunes or Facebook or YouTube. Take a screenshot of that and send it to info@workthesystem.com. And once a week, we'll be drawing one person out of that list of comments and mailing you a copy of that book right behind me, Work the System. And so if you want that physical book, make sure to email us at info@workthesystem.com. And if you want the digital version and other business resources so you can learn to make more and work less, go to workthesystem.com. Easy to remember. So workthesystem.com, and I will see you all next week.